challenging ourselves to keep bringing great programs to you. Tonight is sort of a result of that. We want to keep growing, we want to keep expanding. And in July, we had a we get a lot of pop-ups, is what we call them at the museum. We pop up. Somebody comes, somebody calls, and we want to take care of everybody, but we're really busy. And some of those pop-ups really stick. And in July, actually, when I was out of town at a family reunion, my boss, Dr. Mike Bell, and Connie, who you all know, walking the floor with me for Q&A, they met with a couple of folks that we're going to hear from one of about a great initiative that we thought really made sense. And they want to help South Louisiana, which we're all about, and they want to do it during the Super Bowl, which sounded like the worst possible time for us to do anything because we're going to be pretty darn busy. But we wanted to figure out, okay, well, how can we partner with them? This is a worthwhile initiative. And it makes a lot of sense. They want to honor the veterans, both past and present. And we wanted to also think as to how can we enhance the experience of our loyal and learned audience members like you guys who come year in and year out to our conference. You guys have raised a hand for somebody who's been here more than 2 conferences. Exactly. Thank you. You've proved my point. So Beyond All Boundaries is great, but you've seen it probably 12 times. You can see it another 12 times. It will still be great. So what do we do on Friday night of our conference for the open house? And we thankfully found Force Blue, or they found us. And we thought that we would show a special screening with a wonderful dinner on Frog Fathers. I've got to say there was a little bit of motivation on my end because Frog Fathers being the UDTs of World War II, I thought that's going to be the subject of the 2025 pre-conference symposium, and I'd love to get some people excited to book next year's conference at this year. But sort of joking, sort of serious, we're going to have a deep dive next year on the special forces and special operations of World War II. And tonight is sort of the kickoff for 2025. To kick off this film, it's going to be my pleasure and certainly an honor to introduce a local, if you consider Chalmette local. He's a Chalmatian. I've never met a Chalmatian I've never liked. I've never not liked. I always love Chalmatians. Guess what? He's a Navy SEAL. I'm going to stand over here. Steve Gonzo Gonzalez, Master Chief SEAL retired, served our nation honorably with distinction for 34 years. He served in the Navy, retiring in 2016. Combat veteran with multiple deployments, and he served in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Joint Guardian, Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and numerous operations around the world that you probably can't tell us about. His awards include 2 Bronze Stars for Valor, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for Valor, 5 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and various other medals and awards. As I mentioned, proud native of New Orleans and currently resides in Florida, and he has a pretty distinguished academic career too, always a life learner. Norwich University alumnus with a Bachelor of Science in Strategic Studies and Defense Analysis, Teaching and Learning Certificate, and Masters of Arts in Strategic Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, my new friend, Steve Gonzo Gonzalez.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll remind all of you that all of those accolades, everything, SEAL Sniper, 2 Bronze Stars, 12 combat deployments, all of that, I will still get my ass chewed by my cute little wife if I don't put the trash out on Tuesdays, all right? So just keep things in perspective, all right? So, so I was born and raised in Chalmette, which is the best suburb of New Orleans. It's great, fantastic, known for its academic excellence. But so I was born and raised there. I knew at 14 years old I was going to join the Navy. I knew it. I grew up. My grandmother. I don't know if any of you are from the greater New Orleans area, but we used to have a program called The Big Show, the big movie, 3 o'clock every day, and it would show like World War II movies, Jeff Chandler, Clark Gable, all of those. So I saw those movies and said, that's the life for me. I want to travel. I want to see the world. I don't want to read about Paris. I want to go to Paris. So I joined the Navy. There were no books, no movies, anything about SEALs. And then some guys, 8 years in, came on board one of our ships. They didn't look like us. They didn't act like us. Like, who are those guys? Well, those are Navy SEALs. And I was like, what the hell's a Navy SEAL? So I went and talked with them, and I said, that's a job for me. So at the young age of 32, I went through SEAL training. The average age of SEAL trainees is 22. So special kind of stupid right here. Yeah. So I went to BUD/S, became a SEAL, and then I went to SEAL Team 2, SEAL Team 4. As I said, I was a sniper, and then I worked my way up through leadership, and then I retired as our ops master chief for the training of the East Coast SEAL teams, which, like I said, I went in under Reagan under his first term and retired under Obama in his second term. So I led a glorious career, served with some of the most wonderful people ever imagined doing great things for our country. So I retire. Oh, yeah. Thank you. It's the guys that I served with. You guys remember at the end of Band of Brothers, Dick Winters. Were you a hero? No, but I served in a company with heroes. So yeah, I mean, like, you want to talk about intimidation? I mean, I'm hard as woodpecker lips. All right, but I've got a World War II veteran in front of me. I'm like, all right, yeah, I might be cool, kill more people than cancer. That's a bad dude right there. So yeah. So I get out and I'm looking for something special. I want to be part of something special, and then I learned about Force Blue. And then if you don't know, Force Blue, we take special operations veterans and we work with scientists on marine environmental projects. So we've repaired Florida's coral reef, California's kelp beds. We've done sea turtle assessment missions where we'll go down. It's called sea turtle wrangling, which is as cool as it sounds. So we bring the sea turtles up and the scientists check them for diseases, tumors, and unfortunately, because of chuckleheads who would throw their plastics over, they'll cut plastics off of their fins and their necks, stuff like that. So it's a great way for our guys to continue to serve. Coming full circle to my wonderful hometown of New Orleans. So now the Super Bowl, the NFL is one of our partners. The Super Bowl is going to be here in New Orleans. Hopefully, the powerhouse of the NFL, the mighty New Orleans Saints, will be in the Super Bowl. But, sometimes we let the rest of the NFL have fun. Yeah. So we're going to have that project. So we've project with a wonderful group called Chef's Brigade, who are in attendance as well. So Chef's Brigade, they're a group of restaurateurs who grow oysters, serve them, and then recycle them. Yes, it's an amazing thing. So we're going to be working with them as well as some scientific partners. And in February, we're going to be outplanting recycled oyster shells to build the reef up to prevent the shore break from that happening, but also oysters will repopulate. So the oysters that you might eat in a couple of years, we're going to plant in February. How cool is that? So it's a great thing. So that's what we do. We're Force Blue. All right. So all of that saying, remember that what's the greatest 3 rules of public speaking? Be brilliant, be brief, be gone. So I'm getting ready to shut my cake hole. You're going to ready to watch a documentary called Frog Fathers. It's 4 guys. Jim Papineau, who's my friend up there, retired lieutenant commander, one of the original members of SEAL Team 6. And 2 other guys, Ricky Brown, Corey Zillig, friends of mine. We went over to Normandy, and we went to Fort Pierce, Florida, where Navy SEAL started back in 1943. And then we went to Normandy to discover and talk about the original frogmen and their actions on D-Day. All of this was provided by our sponsor, Mr. Arnaud from World of Warships, right here, who funded the whole thing. I got to give some shout-outs. Now, you're like, oh, Gonzo, that had to take a long time. Everybody calls me Gonzo. If you call me Steve, I know you're a telemarketer. It's all right. So, Gonzo, that had to take a long time. from soup to nuts, 6 weeks. From the time we shot it to the time it was ready, 6 weeks. He's going to punch me in the baby maker when I do this. One guy and his assistant, Mr. Bob Whitney, right there, did the whole thing. When you see this, you're going to be like, there's no way 6 weeks. Trust me. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my executive director, Mr. Jim Ritterhoff, who's founded Force Blue. So last things, if you're interested, hey, what's Force Blue? ForceBlueTeam.org. That's who we are. You can learn about everything we're doing. Even better, I've watched this museum start from a wee little museum across the street. Started off the Higgins boats, which were made right here in New Orleans, which General Eisenhower, as you guys all know, said turned the tide of the World War II. Also, Mr. Higgins had the audacity and the courage to hire ladies and minorities to get the job done. And that's one of the great things that makes our country great. That's why they are truly America's greatest generation. So it's a wonderful thing to be here in my hometown with the Higgins boats, watch the museum grow from across the street to a little thing to the magnificent museum it is right now, which, as we can all agree. So you're going to watch Frog Fathers 1, which we just found out we're going to have Frog Fathers 2. This is honoring the anniversary of 80th anniversary of D-Day. Frog Fathers 2, we're going to document the 80th anniversary of Okinawa. So we're going to go over there. So hopefully next year, when you guys are talking about special forces, we can talk about the 80th anniversary of Okinawa as well. So last thing, then I'm shutting this cake hole. How many veterans do we have in the office or in the audience? Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our veterans. Because I saw your Navy shirt, I have to. Are there any Marines here? Damn, you took my Marine joke. I can't say a Marine joke. It's nice. Yeah. Air Force. Thank you very much. Coast Guard. Thank you very much. Navy. Nice, nice. Anchors away. And then my favorite little brothers, Army. Thank you very much. Nice. Did you say beat Navy? Things you never say to a Navy SEAL sniper at beat Navy. It's like saying, hey, kick my ass later. Right here. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have show Frog Fathers. There is a reception afterwards. If you have questions about Frog Fathers, about Force Blue, about being a Navy SEAL, or anything else, we'll be hanging out. I hope that you truly enjoy it. Most importantly, I hope that you are able to pick up what it was like to honor truly our greatest generation, the brave men of the Naval Combat Demolition Units, which, as you know, not many people know about. But they are the original frogmen, and they did an amazing job paving the way for June 6th, 1944. I wish you all a wonderful evening. God bless you, and God bless America.
Great job, brother.
So we're here off the coast of Utah Beach, and we're gonna dive on a couple of M7s, which were artillery that was utilized in D-Day in the landing of Operation Overlord. We have 4 guys. We have Ricky, Corey, Jim Poppy, and myself. We're gonna dive down there with our guide, take a look at it, and just honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Clear behind?
Yeah, we can go.
Ready?
"80 years ago this June, Allied forces embarked upon the greatest amphibious military invasion in human history, with one objective: the liberation of Europe from the clutches of Nazi Germany. Across 5 beaches in the Normandy region of France, 130,000 troops from the United States, Britain, and Canada made landfall under heavy fire. They faced the extensive fortifications of the Nazi Atlantic Wall, over 1,500 miles of coastal defenses built to repel just such an attack. Despite heavy casualties, these men were victorious. The beachhead was secured, and Paris was liberated less than 2 months later. That is probably the story you already know. The story you don't know, however, is the story of the men who were the first to set foot on the beaches of Normandy. Demolitions experts handpicked from the Navy's best volunteers and trained in hellish conditions to withstand freezing cold, exhaustion, and shell shock. These men were given the unenviable task of demolishing the Nazi surf zone and nearshore defenses to clear the way for the troops that would follow. Landing at low tide under withering fire and with minimal support, they and their Army combat engineer brothers braved up to 600 yards of open beach to disarm mines, clear obstacles, and create avenues of safe passage. They stood on each other's shoulders, stole from cover to set charges, and were wounded or killed in staggering numbers. After the battle, these Naval Combat Demolition Units, or NCDUs, were recognized for their courage and effectiveness in the face of overwhelming odds. Their success and their sacrifice marked the beginning of the naval special warfare tradition that would later become the Navy SEALs. To truly understand the role Naval Combat Demolition Units played on the beaches of Normandy, we must first examine the time they spent on another beach, some 4,000 miles away.
I spent, I don't know how many years in the teams and never really understood our history. I look back on it now, there were Normandy veterans in UDT 21 when I went there. Never said a thing about what they did. Nobody ever told us what they did. I went through my whole Navy career as an officer, fortunately in Naval Special Warfare, but unlike you guys, I'm an officer that never got to spend a lot of time operational. But my aim was to continue to educate the next generation of frogmen and SEALs on who we are and where we came from.
I joined the Navy in 1982, but I knew all the way back when I was 14 that I was going to join the Navy because I would watch movies with my grandmother, guys traveling all around the world, exotic places. So I joined the Navy in 82 as a machinist, called a machinery repairman. That was my job. And some guys came on one of my ships. They didn't look like us. They didn't act like us. Their uniforms were different. They had beards. And I said, "Who are those guys?" They said, "Those are SEALs." I went and talked with them and I said, "That's the job for me." If you don't know where you came from, you won't know where you're going. So it's definitely very important for guys to understand the history of the SEAL teams, to know that what you're doing is very important in that place in time. It's just a small little place in time over the grand scheme of the last 80 years.
So they said, "Hey, we're gonna go over into Europe. We need to hit the beaches over in Europe and destroy all the obstacles there. So we need to have a special unit that can do that." So that's when they came here to Fort Pierce. They started training on nothing here in Fort Pierce at that time. It was pretty quiet, and that's when they started training here and get ready. Fort Pierce, back in 1943, this is where the Naval Combat Demolition Units originally trained. They started training here for the beaches of Omaha and Utah. So this is sacred ground. I mean, this is where they blew stuff up, blew the heck out of the beaches here, sacrificed their time and effort for this country to go over and liberate Europe.
Fort Pierce is where the Navy envisions that its amphibious training base is going to be. You've got landing craft skippers that need to learn how to drive landing crafts. You've got to train troops how to make their way from a ship to a landing craft. How do you find a beach? How do you find a beach that you can actually get off of, that's got beach exits where a tank can get ashore? You can't just drive up a bluff. But how do you then communicate that information to the troops that are offshore? Well, there's a variety, like a cheesecake factory-sized menu of little activities that you've got to do in order to bring troops ashore.
When they were told that they were moving training down here, what was developed here and how did that evolve, I guess, into what we're doing now? Like, what started here?
So the first thing Kaufman did was he developed a curriculum, but he went over and observed what the Scouts and Raiders were doing, and they had a very hardcore PT program.
Now, the one thing that Draper Kaufman has been given when he's given the assignment is how important it is to make this course quickly. There's not a lot of time. We don't know when the invasion is going to happen at that point, or at least he doesn't. He has this idea to take the Scouts and Raiders 8-week-long curriculum, and he goes to him and he says, "This is great. I like everything you got in here, all the boat exercises, all the log PT, all the ocean swims. I like it all, but you got to take that 8 weeks and compress it into 5.5 days." And that's how we got Hell Week. He's not just creating it to see who can accomplish the impossible. He also knows that an impossible course will make better people. It will prove to the individuals that accomplish it they can think, beyond their own limitations. And the only way to convince someone of that is to put them through hell.
Sleep deprivation, in and out of the sand, in and out of the water, boat paddling endlessly, demolitions, type of demolitions, potential type of obstacles. So they developed an NCDU training program.
I've always kind of been a history buff. I've watched Band of Brothers probably 50 times. But now that I'm looking at it and we're going through this process, I'm like, why did I never focus more on my own community? Why isn't that something that's highlighted as you go through the career?
You get these moments when you're no longer in the rocket ship blasting into outer space or the bullet train moving down the rails, is that you get a moment to reflect and kind of think about your career and think about what you've achieved and the things that you were able to do and the people that you were able to do them with. And you get to get a finer appreciation of that stuff, of your own personal history, the history of this country, the history of my own brothers.
Back in 1943 is where Draper Kaufman started everything off. In particular, Hell Week, which is we've all experienced while we're out in Coronado. So what we're going to do today is just have a little PT, little round session in honor of those who served before here in 43, the guys who served with us and the guys who are serving now.
I'm here with 3 guys that are younger than me. Their actual entire career is different than mine because they're a post 9/11 group of guys.
Let's do some 4-count flutter kicks. How many guys? What do you think we should do?
Thinking 25?
25? What do you think? 25? We're doing 30. Got it? Check. Ready? Ready. Flutter kicks. 1, 2, 3, 5. 1.
Same commitment, same passion, same brotherhood, but different experiences for our careers, without doubt. And just to see that this younger group of guys is got the same passion, commitment to a project like this is a window of opportunity that we can now take what happened and just put the history of that war and that service and that commitment into a perspective that, quite honestly, I think gets lost.
Having these names etched in stone and lessons learned in blood, it's irreplaceable for our community because, guys like this, when you're pushing those limits, guys who died, just reminds us what we're doing it's a dangerous freaking job. And number one, it matters. And number two, you know, America deserves a place where you push the limits so hard and you're going so fast, pushing things so hard that, hey, things happen.
We're gonna take 4 guys who were trained here at Fort Pierce and then made the ultimate sacrifice in Normandy. So I have 4 names. For Corey, you'll have Arthur Hickey. Ricky, you'll have Ozzy Mingledorf Jr. Myself, I'll have John Jacobson. And for Jim, you'll have Conrad Mills. We were given 4 names who were on the memorial wall at the museum and we know served over on D-Day. So we are going to research and get the history of those gentlemen as much as we can to honor them.
When you read, naval history, you're reading history a lot about the technological instrument of warfare, either an aircraft or a ship. The Navy SEAL teams, because it's a subset of this largely technological branch of service, wasn't particularly focused on, thinking about the individuals that actually, created this history. How did a naval unit become this thing, this go-anywhere, capture-kill commando force? That's how we come to history. We all want to know about our own story. Books about the Holocaust or slavery. We want to know these monumental things that turned us into who we are.
These people can't be forgotten. What happened can't be forgotten. Globally, the things going on right now. The time for this kind of a reminder, it matters right now.
This is kind of where they would check in new students or whatever before starting Hell Week or training. Guys walking into this location and being like, checking in for NCDU school. It's hard to imagine.
Those guys were no different than we are, right? They were no different. They were young dudes. They were young warriors going like, I want to do something great. That looks freaking hard.
Yeah.
Send me to there. I want to do that. And then they get here and they're like, holy crap, what did I just get myself into?
Yep.
But nothing changed, right? Feeling those ghosts of the past and connecting with them and being like, damn, you guys were our forefathers.
And think about the world at that point in time too, okay? Yeah. They didn't know what they were getting into, but the world was on fire.
Yeah.
And they, said me.
Yeah. There's connection pieces in history that will link us. Sometimes we don't always see them because we're immersed in the craziness of the job.
Sure.
But the connection piece is there, and this is all part of our history.
I can't imagine what these guys thought about what was going to happen to them. I don't think they ever thought that whatever happened, that they were going to walk away from it. They were a personification of what our guys are today. Never fail mentality. They knew what they were going to do. They were steadfast in doing it. Nobody ever looked back.
It was a no-fail mission. There's a lot of operations we've done recently that, we could have withdrawn from or didn't go because of, but this was going no matter what. I mean, you've got thousands of men, ships, boats behind you that need to come in and drop stuff off. So you could not fail.
I never made it to Normandy, but when you walk into places like Omaha Beach, you walk into Dachau concentration camp, like there is an aura that it's unspeakable, but when you're there, you can feel it and you know it. I want to stand there and I want to just be quiet and just stop and feel it and just appreciate what happened there.
It's really hard to envision on that beach. We were standing there looking out, what happened here as they prep to go over there. You've got to live that to really get, we know that. We know that. We don't talk about a lot of things for a lot of different reasons because nobody can get it if you haven't been there and done it. But I think we have to touch it, feel it, be there. And that's what I want.
As the Allies are, racing against time to create a unit that can defeat these obstacles, Rommel is doing everything he can to crush the weight of the coastline with all of these various obstacles, and he's got log ramps to a flip landing craft. He's literally cutting down all the forests in Normandy to supply the stakes. He's taking all those Belgian gates, 3,000-pound behemoth steel structures in the beaches to prevent landing craft from getting ashore. You know, the Normandy coastline, he's got this massive backdrop. It creates bunkers and super bunkers, and all of this creates this almost impenetrable wall.
Rommel is one of the few generals that already faced the Allies in North Africa. And he realized the sheer power of the Allied forces. As soon as they have a beachhead, with their numbers, with their industry, with the power of the Air Force and the Navy, they will win. So his idea is really, if we want to stop them, we need to stop them on the coast, on day one.
In the months leading up to the invasion, Allied forces began assembling at training bases along England's southwestern coast. It was from these bases that Operation Overlord would be launched.
First NCDUs go to England in November. November of 43, that's when the first batch makes it over, and they're totally mishandled, misused.
When they went to England, there wasn't a marching band there to receive them. In fact, when they got there, nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew what they were supposed to do. But because of the training that they had in Fort Pierce, the NCDU men themselves decided, we know there's obstacles there. We've got to practice what we have to do. They also figured out that because the amount of obstacles that they were going to encounter, that the NCDUs couldn't do it by themselves. And that's when they added the Army engineers to the GAP teams.
They've been doing their best to develop training, but also get equipment. They don't have, a great way to carry their explosives until, an enterprising young guy named Carl Hageson comes up with a self-securing individual charge that can be fitted into individual pouches. That they have like a fast, reliable method to actually put these charges on the obstacles.
Now the training that they've got, how do you adapt it to the situation? Because one thing to have the unit who knows exactly what they need to do, but they need to do it with all of the landing that is going to happen around you. In 1942, when Hitler is thinking about building his Atlantic Wall, they're starting here to set up artillery position, which purpose is not to fire on the coast, but to engage the Navy. There were 6 of these old French guns overlooking the channel. Maximum range on these guns could be around 11, 12 miles, which put you in potentially on range of the place where you're going to stop the transport ship and load everyone on the landing craft. So this is why very early on we had to come out with a plan to make sure that these guns are not firing. The first phase is starting to bomb Point Hawk even before the day. When you stop the air bombardment, that's the USS Texas opening fire. So these huge shells are just slamming into Point Hawk to also keep the Germans buried inside their bunker, making it the most bombed place in Normandy. And when you stop this naval shelling, then you should have boots on the ground to capture it and make sure it will never fire. And that's the job of the Rangers. So their job will be to get on the cliff, climb the cliff, capture the position. The Rangers were something very new for the United States. These guys train extensively and then had to go through some amphibious training. And the place to get good amphibious training in the US, Fort Pierce. So in September, October of 1943, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, the men that are going to land here, trained in the same facility, the same area at the NCDU. A small unit. You are kind of independent. Even if you cut off from your command, you know the plan, you know what to do, and you move on.
From the imagery, they might be like, oh, it's probably not that steep. And then they start coming up there. Yeah. But it's just like the invasion is so large that there's no room for deviation. In the teams, we just lived and breathed by contingencies. If it didn't work out, we would just flex. But when you've got 6,000 ships behind you, you're like, dude, we can't deviate. Get a line and start climbing. First guy gets shot, second guy, all right, your turn. Oh, man.
On se retrouve dans le silence, avec à la proximité de ces gens-là. Et c'est ça qui est passionnant dans la plongée sur les épaves du débarquement. Ce qui fait qu'on a pu voir aujourd'hui au cours de la plongée aussi bien les chars d'assaut, MC de Priest, avec les chenilles, etc., mais également leurs remorques, qui elles ne sont pas sur chenilles mais sur pneus. Utilisés encore aujourd'hui, on les sortirait de l'eau, ils sont encore en parfait état. Et ça, c'est vraiment une marque très intéressante, c'est qu'on se rend compte que malgré les nombreuses années, plus de 80 ans qui sont passés sous l'eau, on a ces vestiges-là que nous, plongeurs, on a la chance de pouvoir toucher. On touche les vrais pneus, les vrais châssis, les vrais chars. En fait, en plongée, vous touchez l'histoire au plus proche.
Stories that lie beneath the surface are stories that often resonate with veterans. That is especially true for the veterans of Force Blue, a nonprofit organization that retrains and redeploys special operations veterans to work on ocean and marine conservation missions.
Kelp bed restoration, coral reef restoration, sea turtle assessment missions, invasive species removal. It's a great way for our special operations veterans to continue to serve, because when guys get out, whether they're successful or they're struggling, they're always looking to be part of something special. I found myself that moment of clarity where you realize that, man, this is entirely different. Most of the things that I've done have been more on the demolition side, so this is pretty neat in the restoration side. Coming full circle, 1943, the original frogmen were training Fort Pierce, Florida, damaging coral to learn how to clear beaches on D-Day as well as in the Pacific. Now here it is, plus 75 years later, you have frogmen repairing our coral, once again, for the greater good of man. What better way to continue honoring those guys than continuing to serve as veterans with Force Blue?
You know, we get down there and we see the M7s on the bottom, and it hasn't moved. Since that moment, you're touching that piece of history. You stop and you just kind of look up and you're like, it was right, like right there, you know, is where all this stuff was taking place.
Sur certaines de ces épaves, les plongeurs posent des plaques commémoratives tous les ans, des gerbes de fleurs, pour dire qu'on n'oublie pas les gens qui sont sous l'eau aujourd'hui. Certes, vous avez des cimetières, mais il ne faut pas oublier les soldats qui n'ont pas posé le pied sur la terre de France et qui sont restés en mer, pris prisonniers dans leurs épaves. Et c'est un petit peu notre mission en tant que plongeurs, d'aller leur rendre hommage aussi.
It was cool seeing the big fish, lots of crabs, like, hey, might have been death back then, but, you know, now it's just kind of become part of the ocean now.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a little
Yeah.
tiny reef that has life.
80 years later, and you know, nature still is preserving history.
Yeah.
You know, it's eerie too, because you're like, down here for a reason.
It's just another reminder of what those men, sailors, airmen, Marines, soldiers went through.
I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, and I was a combat medic with F Company, 16th Regiment. I was part of the invasion.
The ride in the boat. What was that ride like? I mean, I know the weather conditions, but as far as like...
Well, the weather conditions were very bad,
Yeah.
in spite of the fact that we were supposed to make the invasion on the 5th of June, but it was very stormy, windy, it was very bad weather, so it was postponed until the 6th of June, but that was not much better. Ships were going up about 6 meters from low ebb up to high tide. It was difficult because we had to climb down ladders on the sides of the ships, and when we reached a certain point, we had to jump into the troop transports. Many men missed the boats and some landed in the water. Of course, they were loaded down with ammunition and heavy equipment and so forth. Many of them drowned, went right down to the bottom. But, well, we did the best we could. Yeah.
Getting to the battle, you know, these guys, they've been wet for over 24 hours. They're all seasick. The only bathroom that the guys have had on the LCTs has been a bucket. The water on board the ships is all brackish at best. We think about going into combat, you know, you've got all of your gear, you're dry, you know, the battle is going to be the worst part. So much of history has been decided not by the actual fighting of the battle, but actually in the getting to the battle. You know, folks that can get to the battle first are often the ones that are victorious.
The Germans thought that the Allies were going to land at high tide. This meant the beach would have been covered with water because the tide would have been in. And as the landing craft came in, flat bottom on them, they bounce up and down on the waves. You go up on the crest of a 3-foot wave in a 10-ton landing craft, and the landing craft were made out of plywood. You're going to come straight down on top of one of these obstacles, and it's going to go through the bottom of the landing craft like it isn't even there. And this is when the Allies had to then rethink their entire strategy, and they said, okay, instead of landing with the tide fully in, we're now going to land with the tide fully out. By landing with the tide fully out, we'll have all the obstacles on the sand, and the engineers in the NCDUs' job was to blow 16 lanes through the obstacles on D-Day on Omaha Beach. Each lane was to be 150 feet wide. They were to mark the lanes with marker buoys and flags to allow the landings to continue on. Satchel charge, which you can see here, these green bags, each one of those had 8 blocks of C2 explosives in it. And the whole idea was each NCDU man came ashore with his equipment, also carrying another 2 or 3 satchel charges as well. You get up to an obstacle you want to get rid of, you just take it off your shoulder, you hang it on the obstacle, you pull the fuse, and you just let it do its stuff.
You can't destroy, you know, all the obstacles on a 5-mile wide beach. You've got to compress and you've got to, you know, focus on individual gaps. So they create 16 gap assault teams. The hope was that a combination of naval gunfire, aerial bombardment was going to create a path so that the NCDUs and the gap assault teams would have been redundant. It's not at all what happened.
The first assault wave was supposed to be preceded onto the beach by the Air Corps and the Navy, but most of the Air Corps bombardment fell a mile to 3 miles inland. Navy bombardment lasted 22.5 minutes. It simply wasn't strong enough. When the first assault wave of infantry came in, they were meant to be coming into a largely defeated German army on the beach already, with most of their positions being destroyed, but the vast majority of the initial bombardment had missed. And as the Americans came up the beach, the Germans suddenly opened fire. You normally have 2 men in a gun team. You'd have the gunner firing, the loader passing him spare bullets, spare barrels, managing the ammunition. The zigzagging lines coming down here is the remains of the German trench which would have got you here initially. You guys know, never silhouette yourself against the skyline. Coming over the top here, somebody's on the beach, that's exactly what you're doing. This trench would have been deeper than a man is tall. Shrapnel bullets going to go over the top of your head, and this just gave the Germans access to come in.
When it was low tide and those guys first rolled in, they had to cover so much ground. That's a lot of time running up to the seawall. But with this enfilading fire that all these machine guns have set up, it doesn't matter if you're on the seawall or not, because you still get raked.
Yep. By and large, most of these things were so well camouflaged, you couldn't even tell a German bunker was a German bunker. They were less than about 50 meters away from it, and only when you were staring right in through the aperture. Never mind from a landing craft being thrown around on the rough seas. One of the things very few people realize is that over 2/3 of German gun positions on Omaha Beach were never knocked out by the Allies at all on D-Day, but quite simply abandoned by their own German gunners when they ran out of ammunition. And it gives you an idea as to how difficult the fight was on Omaha Beach.
When the NCDUs land, you know, they all have a different experience. One of the first to land is NCDU 11, which is Gap Assault Team 1. They land on a completely quiet beach. There's nothing happening. There's no enemy fire. They've been, you know, preparing for the worst. The ramp drops, it's completely quiet.
We all, you know, had our certain guys to research. Mine was Ozzy Claude Mingledorf III. Ozzy was put into UDT 11 and ended up being on Gap Assault Team 1. They were one of the, if not the first assault craft to the beach. When we were down there and we were looking at those machine gun nests, and that 88 would have been looking directly down where Ozzy and his team was. This is exactly what you would have seen in the first line. This is a Belgian gate and was one of the toughest obstacles for the guys to clear a path through. As he's finishing placing the charge on that first obstacle, all hell broke loose. Crossfire, you've got the 88s firing down on him, and that's when he takes a round through the leg. They continued clearing up through the beach, and they were actually the first Gap assault team to clear a path. After they clear all their obstacles, they're making their way up to the anti-tank wall, and Ozzy was low crawling, wounded, shot through the leg, and that's when he was shot in the head, and then he died immediately. Ozzy was shot through the leg and wounded through the entire beach assault and didn't fall until after the mission was done. The Gap teams were the breachers. In our understanding, when you go into a compound on a target, like, you can't get in that door, you're not doing anything. Those guys were opening the door for the entire Allied invasion.
Their job wasn't about returning fire. Other guys had that job. Their job was blowing up the obstacles on the beach and clearing the lanes. The second they were in it till it was done. There is something to say about the finality of just saying, until you're dead or we win, you're here.
Overlooking Omaha Beach, in the town of Kovel-sur-Mer, lies the Normandy American Cemetery and the graves of over 9,300 men killed on D-Day and in the battles that immediately followed.
So what we will do here is the same ceremony as we do with family members of service members that are honored here in this cemetery. So right here we have sand that we took directly from Omaha Beach. And what you can do is take some sand in your hand and rub it on the name to highlight the name like in gold letters. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
All right, guys, that was assigned Arthur Burton Hickey. And Arthur, he enlisted in the Navy in 1943 at 17 years old. He also died at 17 years old. I mean, his whole military career, if you wanted, his service, encompassed his 17th year of life. You can only imagine, like, you know, being 17 years old and being in those boats. It's a little bit of a chaos, but probably also very somber, very silent at moments. They were part of Gap Team 15, and they landed on Fox Green, the far left side, and there was a heavy beach to land on. We all know that the game's played on razor-thin margins. It could be that spot that you're right there in time and space, and all of a sudden, you know, you get it. And that's kind of what happened to Arthur and his buddy Ed Joe Greenfield. They had just exited their boat, and they're towing their craft laden with explosives, and a German mortar lobbed in. It was a direct hit right on that boat, right where all of those explosives were. And when it detonated, it just took out Arthur and Ed Joe Greenfield, who had been his buddy since boot camp in Sampson, New York. You hear about valor and gallantry and all these amazing acts of heroism, but even just crossing that channel and just knowing what you're gonna face is, that's like an act of heroism in its own right, because you know what's coming. And we all know that the anticipation can sometimes get you more than anything else. And it's an honor to come here and take sand from Omaha Beach and rub it in his name and honor him. If I was sitting here talking to, Arthur Hickey at 17, I know I could see myself in him. Just researching some of those guys and learning more about the NCDUs, you feel that connection. Who knows, maybe 80 years from now, the guys that are doing the job are gonna learn about our generation and what we did, and even if it's a pale shade of what the GAP teams and the NCDUs had to do, but it's there nonetheless.
Remember the bridge on the River Kwai?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is awesome.
All this is helpful for the visitors of the world to have a history workshop. They can try, they can touch, they can smell, to feel 1944.
So here you go.
So the D-Day Academy was born 20 years ago, June the 6th, 2004. So it's a special place with all the artifacts, all the objects of the war, always remembering somebody 80 years ago. This was his jacket, this was his sweat inside. So it is something which is humanly historic. The human feeling is there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All my life was dedicated to remember and pay respect to the veterans for what they did to bring back freedom and democracy in Europe in 1944-45, after 4 long years of occupation by the Nazis. The price was high, and after 80 days of battle in Normandy, 70,000 French people became casualties for liberation. We lost one child who was my brother. He was 5 years when he was killed by one of the bombings on the city of Caen. The occupation started 18th of June 1940. Get rid of the lower races, handicapped persons, all this was very active. The worst of all is that we were under German Nazi control, but the French had to do the job for the Germans, starting almost a civil war. We need human references to the past, not only the courage or the deeds of heroes. We need the feelings of being in a situation to restore peace, freedom, and democracy.
This is the fuses they would have been putting in. You could pull the fuse, chemical fuses. You could set them off electronically as well. Basically a timer, normally 30 seconds, or again, connect them up to the hell box, which they would also then connect the satchel charges together, wrap primer cord around them, and then put one detonator in the end and try and do a whole string of them. But the problem was they'd come ashore, you'd prepare one obstacle for demolition, wrap the primer cord around the explosive, run on, prepare the next one, run on, prepare the next one. You get 5 or 6 all set. You're just about to use this, and you look back, and you've got 3 or 4 soldiers hiding at the back or underneath each one of the obstacles you just wired for demolition, and nothing you're going to tell them is going to get them to move, because there's people shooting at them and they've got nowhere to go. And this was one of the big problems for the demolition guys. Even when they had the explosives prepared, they still couldn't blow them because the amount of their own soldiers hiding underneath.
More and more waves of soldiers are landing behind them. And as machine gun fire is landing, as 88 shells are landing in threes all around them, the soldiers won't move off the beach. And they're taking cover where the only cover exists, behind these obstacles that the NCDUs and the Army combat engineers are trying to blow. And the only way to get them out, in some cases, is to go from obstacle to obstacle and kick these guys out. They quickly realize it's not going to work. So individuals among them very quickly decide, well, the only way to do this is to go obstacle by obstacle, one at a time, and use all the fuses that we have, take the ones, off dead friends if we run out, and just blow individual obstacles at a time. And that's what they do. All the Army troops that manage to get ashore, there is relative safety at the shingle. They can get up along that line of crushed sea rocks and take cover. The NCDUs and the Gap Assault teams can't. They've got to stay on the beach, and they've got to continue to kick these soldiers out from behind the obstacles and blow them individually.
There were some interesting things that I learned right from the very start, just some similarities between, Conrad Millis. So he was a Midwestern boy. I grew up in Michigan. He was initially born in Illinois. They moved to Missouri. He got married at 20 years old and moved to California, which is why I think, now that I look at it, California is, because I think that's where he got married. 24 years old, he had a child. And then, looking into, June 6, 1944, that puts him at almost 30 years old. And so one of the older guys, and he was actually recognized as one of the older Naval Combat Demolition Unit guys. So he was assigned to NCDU 45, Boat Team 10 was his landing craft. So everything from 0625 is where they actually hit the beach, right on target, right on cue. Things went well. They got all their charges, landed with the first wave as they came in. Immediately when that 0650 charges went off, the machine gun fire, German machine gun fire target right down on them. At that point, apparently their entire gap team just belly crawled. They're down. Chief Millis just decided, nope, not doing it. We got a mission to do here. So he got up, he booked, started putting down additional charges, additional cord out, running it, and that's when machine gun fire just took him out. Easy Red Beach, where he came in with direct fire, because that's right off of where we saw yesterday where those two machine gun positions were. One of those two are the positions that took him out. That was the moment. But I think you put it all together and you think, man, we've all gone through this stuff. The connection was there when we did our homework. The connection was here as we walked around this morning and that sort of thing. But to actually see when we've been in those situations, the firing position, where it happened, and the line of fire, everything, that's when it got real personal. So amazing that that historical piece that connects to the man. I got to stand above the man's grave. You can't help but go back to the teammates of ours in the mine that I've lost. And then that connection happened. It happened on the moment, very unexpectedly. It's the connection at a personal level to what happened here. I will forever remember, Conrad Millis.
These guys weren't just names on a wall. These were like real people who loved and laughed and fought. When we were at Point du Hoc, there's a placard that talked about one of the guys that basically got off the boat, landed on the beach, and got smacked by a bullet right off the bat. That's a very common story when it comes to D-Day, but there was something in there about his widow is buried next to him in an American cemetery out here. She loved that guy so much, at such a young age, because he was like 17. They were like young and in love, but it was so strong and so powerful that 78 years later, she still wanted to be buried with him. It's just kind of humbling to read something like that and be like, man, that guy had to have been such an awesome dude for someone to want to live a whole life after they die and then be buried right next to him.
The gentleman that I was assigned, John Jacobson, he was born in 1910 in Mexico, and his nickname was Johnny or Jack, and he was considered the old man of the group, which is kind of funny because he was 33 when he went through training, and I was 32, so kind of parallels. He was assigned to NCDU 43, Team 6, Gap Team 6. He was supposed to hit at Dog Red, ended up at Easy Green, far left flank, and as he came aboard, he had 40 pounds of demolition. He had his weapon, either it was a carbine, a Thompson, or M1 Garand, his ammo, first aid kit, water, food, and then a Bangalore torpedo, all on his person. You can imagine just sinking in that soft sand as the tide was coming in. In addition to that, he was dragging his IBS behind him, which had extra demo, det cord, mine detector, and 75 to 100 gallons of gas, along with buoy markers, lane markers, and flags. So they were dragging all that stuff, and he just started hard charging down the beach. Originally, they were going to run a trunk line. He saw that guys were hiding behind the obstacles, so he said, heck with it, and he just did individual charges, and it was during that process that he gave his life for the landing. Here it is, it's 8 o'clock, and by this time, all of our guys have already made the ultimate sacrifice, so it's kind of humbling to be here on the beach with you guys as we honor them.
Up until that point, 8:30, 5 individual gaps have been cleared. In those gaps, Army tanks have started to land. Now, if it wasn't for those 5 gaps, the tanks wouldn't have gotten ashore. Without those tanks, the tanks wouldn't have been able to start shooting at the obstacles. If it wasn't for those shooting at the individual obstacles, the destroyers would not have been able to see the tanks targeting individual pillboxes to actually pinpoint fire on the beach. So that's the order of events. Create the gaps, bring in the tanks, use naval gunfire to destroy them. That's what ultimately, decides D-Day. Of the 190 NCDUs, 35 are killed within the first few hours. Another 65 are wounded for a total casualty rate of north of 50%. It's only because you do get ashore at Omaha that the invasion succeeds, that D-Day succeeds. And it is the most important moment in the history of the 20th century, the history of the United States.
The NCDUs were one of only 3 units in Normandy that received a Presidential Unit Citation. A few years ago, several of the SEALs went on a tour of Normandy Beach, and they found monuments dedicated to most of the different units that fought there. And they discovered on Omaha Beach, one of the most difficult beaches to open up the gaps on, there was no monument to the Navy combat demolition units, and just felt that that wasn't right. So I took over the chairmanship of the Navy Combat Demolition Unit monument on Omaha Beach.
So we thought that it would be only fitting and way past time to honor the guys that were the first on the beach here. Luckily, we had the full support of the mayor. He said, all these years I've had like hundreds, literally hundreds of Americans come and ask, can we put up a monument for this and that and every other thing here and whatever. And he's always said no.
J'étais d'accord pour faire un monument ici. J'ai répondu non.
And she asked if they were okay with doing a monument here, and he answered no.
Qu'avaient fait les NCDU sur la plage?
And then after, he was told what did all the NCDUs did on the beach.
Et j'ai trouvé que c'était très important, malgré tout, que j'apporte une attention au dossier.
And he found that it was indeed really important that he paid attention to this file.
Et après, j'ai donné mon accord sur un emplacement, ici, sur une petite surface, un petit triangle d'herbe qui était ici.
And so then after, he gave his authorization on here, on this place, which was just like before, just a triangle of grass over here.
Et puis ça a un peu grandi.
And then it got bigger.
Everyone acknowledges that the 80th anniversary is the big one. I mean, in 20 more years, there'll be the 100th, but no one will be alive. None of the originals, right? Right off that beach right there is where one of the main lanes were and where most of the casualties were. So this is basically ground zero.
Sur Omaha la sanglante, puisqu'on appelle notre plage Omaha la sanglante durant la guerre, puisqu'il y a eu un bain de sang, tout était rouge, la plage était rouge, elle n'était pas jaune, elle n'était pas gold. Et donc, ce qu'il faut surtout, c'est qu'on arrive à convaincre des pays peut-être en difficulté comme aujourd'hui, la Russie avec l'Ukraine, qu'on arrive à convaincre qu'il faut arrêter ces conflits qui tuent tant de personnes. Il ne faut pas que ça revienne. Il ne faut pas qu'on revoie ce genre de guerre affreuse où effectivement il y a tant de morts. Examples matter, and we don't have a lot of examples of courage and bravery and selflessness like Normandy. 90% of these kids were 18 years old, 19 years old. The average age was under 20. For young people to understand that people their age had the courage and the ability to do something that mattered to people more than just themselves, to represent that and to show it, I think is an important mission.
Going all the way back, those guys, when they first went in, we knew what we were getting into, but they didn't. They're like, I'll just kind of volunteer for this thing. I don't know what it is. Class 1, Class 2, Class 3. What is this stuff? We knew, but these guys had no idea. And then, like you said, they get on the beach, things aren't going the right way, who takes charge? The team guys. Clearing guys out so they can lay the trunk line, or adapting and saying, hey, I can't do a trunk line, but I'm just gonna blow individual obstacles and I'm gonna run up and down the beach. Whose guy was it that had to stand on the shoulders of the other guy?
It was Ozzy.
It was Ozzy, yeah, to blow the obstacle. Gunfight just all around you.
In the very beginning. Yeah.
And the machine gun nests were placed to basically mutually support each other and cover each other's back. But if you think about where those NCDUs, those guys were operating right on the beach, that's like right in the beaten zone. They never left.
Think about what you just said. One of the things that we're always taught, once you're in that kill zone, is break contact, get out of the kill zone, right? Going right back to Bud's days, all the way back to it.
Yeah.
They were operating in the kill zone the entire time. Their mission had to take place in the kill zone, and continue to move forward and execute. That's for a bunch of guys that didn't know what they were walking into. That's amazing.
I'm proud that Ozzy was my guy, and we have to find those stories. And it doesn't matter what generation you're coming from. It could be somebody that's waiting to go to Bud's right now, just rose their right hand and joined the Navy. You tell them Ozzy's story, and what I know now and what you guys know, there's no way they're not going to be infatuated with that. Getting this stuff out there and really understanding where you came from is massive. Like you cannot understate that.
You think back to everything that we have seen, touched, felt, we can share that. There's an inherent responsibility to make sure that our community, Naval Special Warfare, the young guys coming up, we understand what those naval combat demolition units did that day. That is where I have a new appreciation of that connection, that pride.
They created a discipline, a mindset that you were different. Not that you were special, but that you were different and that you had a different job to do. These guys walked into the face of a curtain of bullets with a focused mission and an attitude that they would not fail, and they didn't.
Kind of reflecting back to the beginning, what they knew and Draper Kaufman's confidence in the guys going over there alone and unafraid. He said, what I'm giving these guys, or what these guys are coming out of this training with, is something that's uncomparable to any other training in the military, is they have purpose and they have vision. And it's the only thing that can be compared to combat itself. And this is 24, 17-year-old kids going through training. They didn't know it at the time, but they proved it.
Draper's not the founder of the SEAL teams. He's not even the founder of Naval Special Warfare. What he is, though, is he is the creator of Hell Week. Without Hell Week, there's a good chance that the NCDUs don't succeed at Normandy. They don't create those gaps. Then you don't validate Hell Week. But because they succeed in Normandy, they validate all the training that precedes them. And that's what convinces planners to keep this course alive. Naval Special Warfare is born on a no-fail mission. The people that go through the same thing that they went through are just as capable of accomplishing what they did.
We go back to our training. That's the commonality between them and us. They were just laying the foundation for everything that we've become throughout our careers. They were giants among men, and we are literally just walking in their footsteps to hopefully be as great as those men were that day.
As the story goes, the night they left Fort Pierce for England and eventually the invasion, the men of the NCDUs began singing a song on the way to the train station. Written by an unknown author, it would later become known as the Song of the Demolitioneers.
When the Navy gets into a jam, they always call on me to pack a case of dynamite and put right out to sea.
Like every honest sailor, I drink my whiskey clear. I'm a shooting, fighting, dynamiting demolitioneer.
Out in front of Navy, where you really get the heat, there's a bunch of crazy blasters pulling off some crazy feet.
With their pockets full of powder and caps stuck in their ears, they're shooting, fighting, dynamiting demolitioneers.
When the war is over and the waxen waves are home, we'll swim back to the USA and never more shall roam. All the local maidens will get the best of care, and will raise a bunch of squalling, brawling demolitionaires. With the demons of the Navy, there's nothing we can't do. A rough and ready bunch of boys, your friendly demolition crew.
So welcome to the dedication. We are here to dedicate and honor those men who cleared these very same beaches on D-Day.
As we stand in the shadow of this monument, we are reminded not only of the valor displayed on these distant shores, but also of the enduring bonds of camaraderie and unity that continue to unite us all.
Jour après jour, nous avons été admiratifs et impressionnés par ce que l'on voyait se construire. Merci aussi au Navy SEAL Museum pour ce merveilleux cadeau.
The living beach is a monument to all the places Navy frogmen have fought, trained, and died. We will now place all the sand in the monument.
We are here on hallowed soil, where every foot of ground was bought with blood and paid for in the hope that liberty would prevail. We are here to preserve the promise that the passage of time will not dim the glory of their deeds.
Frog Fathers.